We're going to turn to Luke chapter 6. If you're in one of these Bibles, it's in the back of the book on page 60. So I want you to take a look at where we are. So as many of you who have been here have heard us say before, this year the lectionary is going through the Gospel according to Luke, and so we're getting through Luke. So you can see if you look on here on chapter 6, you can see at this very top of the page some of the things that Jesus has done, the healing, the calling of the apostles, then some teaching. Remember last week we talked about the blessings and woes, and now we're continuing on right underneath that, starting at verse 27, love for enemies. Listen now for God's holy word for you. But I say to you that listen, love enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Okay, so let me just say right now, I am really sorry Bruce isn't preaching, because this is not a passage that I really wanted to deal with. So, with that out of the way, let me tell you what I think. I started off and I saw this, Yvonne Crow-Tipton wrote this about this passage in a commentary, and it made me laugh, so I thought I'd start off with laughter for today, because there's not a lot to laugh about in this passage. Congregations respond to this text in the same way my children respond to seeing cooked spinach on their plate at dinner. No matter how much I explain the nutritional value, no one around the table really wants to dig in. I think he's right. Who really wants to dig in and live by these words of Jesus? Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. I'm sure I'm not the only one who finds this passage difficult to affirm, and even harder, if next to impossible, to follow. To those who have been hurt or victimized, cheated, violated, assaulted, abused, mugged, misjudged, oppressed, bullied, left out, it would be hard to think of a more disturbing, which was my original word when I thought about what to write down, and I changed it, so I just want you to know where my thought process was. I was disturbing, so I decided maybe it's easier to deal with problematic in this passage. So as we keep these words in mind, love your enemy, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, I want you to notice, and this is important, Jesus says, pray for those who abuse you. Do not stay with those who abuse you. Still, even with that, Jesus' words are extremely challenging, especially in our world today. In the homiletics today, Timothy Merrill and Carl Wilton write this: many would also agree that sometimes the United States can be described as a nation of enemies, a nation at war with itself or a house divided, as Lincoln puts it. There isn't a person alive who doesn't have an enemy, and probably more than one. And then he goes on to list, or they go on to list, some of the battle lines. Vaxxers versus anti-vaxxers, maskers versus anti-maskers, Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives, vegans versus meat eaters, the rich versus the middle class, rural versus urban. And then they even go on to write, this list doesn't even take into account the multifaceted issues such as race, climate change, and when you have all these many things going on against your enemy, things can get ugly. It is legitimate to ask, with everything that divides us, what in the world is holding us together? They say, good question. But you might respond by saying, well, the people on your list are not really my enemies. True, they're never going to be my BFFs, but it's not like I'm going to take a baseball bat to their kneecaps or something. That's true. We would not, but what are we doing that Jesus asked us to do? Listen again to what he says. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Perhaps it would be helpful to be reminded of what Jesus meant by the word love, because I'm having a hard time with any of these, but especially maybe that one. Remember, there are 3 different words in the Bible that describe the 3 different kinds of love. Jesus is commanding us to be open and concerned towards those who are our enemies. Love in this sense is not that warm feeling affection towards our enemies, nor is it understood as that passionate kind of love. The word love used in this text is agape form of the word love. Agape means to be gracious and outgoing and actively interested in the welfare of persons. And yet, knowing that we're asked to do agape love, it is still hard to do that for those who we consider to be our enemies or who are against us. Agape love is the love which God has for us, and it's the love which we are to have for others. A good example of the agape love is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan hated the enemy, stopped to help out was a sense of agape love, for there is nothing in it for the Samaritan, nothing whatsoever. As the Greek philosophy which influenced the Jewish writers of that day state, behave as not to make friends into enemies, but to turn enemies into friends. Loving your enemies is not some mushy sentiment, and it is the supreme ideal. And it's an exhortation when it seems the norms of normal care and concern for others. That is what Jesus is telling us, calling us to do. That is what kingdom living looks like. But the truth is, this command to love our enemies, do good to those who hate us, bless those who curse us, pray for those who abuse us, and forego retaliation and retribution, have distressed Christians in every age. The tendency has been, and still is today, is to water these words down, making them more palatable, easier to digest and do, to compromise, to modify Jesus' words. Surely, God, you don't mean for me to love that person after all that they have done to me? How can I love the person who has hurt me or my family or my friends? How can I ask for blessings for them, pray for them, for those who have belittled me, for those who have said unkind things to me, for those who have lied to me and cheated on me and hurt me? You see, here's the rub, and I think it goes against human nature. Or at least I have to admit it goes against my nature, and maybe that's what I need to say. It's hard for us to accept that God is gracious and generous towards those whom we deem unworthy of God's grace and God's generosity. Those who we seem as unacceptable and bad, those who we don't want to feel God's love and grace and blessing. I heard this, I don't even know where I heard this, but it has stuck with me. The truth is, and this is basically, I'm kind of paraphrasing, I hope I have it right. It says, the truth is that we are not bothered or upset by those who seem to be excluded from God's kingdom. Rather, what bothers us, what upsets us, are those who have been included in God's kingdom that we don't think should be. That's what gets us. Remember Jonah's complaint with God? He was mad because God was gracious toward the very people that he hated, he despised, the Ninevites. Jonah's complaint was a complaint against the very nature of God. God who loves and forgives, whose justice and mercy flows according to God's will and not ours. God who gave his only Son so that we might have abundant eternal life, and none of us deserve it. God did this not because we earned it, or not because of our good works or our good deeds. God did it because God's love would not let us go. Jesus tells us that we are to do good towards our enemies. I am speaking it a lot because I have to say it to myself. We're doing good towards our enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Easy words to say, but hard when you're in the middle of a situation that just tears your heart apart. Christ is lifting up to us that Christians do not reciprocate in evil ways or in bad. We do not draw our behavior responses for those who we would call enemies, those who hate, denounce, reject the Christian name and the principles. We are not to look at what they have done to us or against us, striking back in a similar way. We are not to get back or to get even. That's not the way God would have us act. But then Luke, which is really interesting, takes this love business even a step further. Not only are we not to reciprocate in kind to those who treat us badly, but also to those who treat us favorably. In other words, what he is saying is just because someone treats you nicely doesn't mean that's the reason that you treat them nicely in return. Just as our behavior is not determined by our enemy's behavior, neither is our behavior to be determined by our friends' behavior. So here it is. God acts in love and grace towards us all, and that is how we are to relate to one another. Jesus is not asking for feelings and emotions that we cannot control. What we are asked to do is to show compassion and concern for families and for foes, for those who treat us favorably and those who do not, for those who curse us and those who bless us. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, I have decided to stick with love, he said, because hate is too great of a burden to bear. I have decided to stick with love because hate is too great a burden to bear. The Christian community is called to live by a different rhythm, a different mantra, if you will. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. Basically, what is being asked of us, in some ways, is to love unreasonably. So as I sat here knowing y'all, knowing different circumstances going on in different people's lives, I know this is a tough passage. So the words that came to me, and maybe these are helpful to you who are struggling with this, as I struggle with this, as I sat here, the scripture that came to me was be still. Be still and listen to God. Perhaps that's where we start with this passage. Not with our complaints or our excuses or our watering down or even going out immediately. But perhaps we start with just being still. Being still and allowing God to enter into our hearts and our lives, guiding us, maybe sometimes minute by minute. That will be enough. Thanks be to God for God's gracious and challenging word to us this day.